My name is Claudio Cambon. I am a documentary photographer. I specialize in photographing people in certain situations. That's at least the way that I go into a situation, although I'm interested in describing more than a social context. I'm interested in describing the personal realities of the people that I meet, and somehow thereby also describing something about myself. For me, a photograph is both a mirror and a window onto the world, and so I strive to make a picture that tells a story about the person or the place in the photograph, and then also what my story is in relation to it. So nominally, I'm a documentary photographer, but with that complication. We are in Tbilisi, Georgia, at the Kolya Photo Festival, which is a lovely event over a period of about a week that has a whole series of exhibits of photographers from all over the world and photographers here in Georgia as well. A series of there's an educational component too. There are workshops, there are portfolio reviews, and then there are all kinds of other associated projects that some of you students are doing as well. So it's a really lovely, lovely occasion. Okay, I have an exhibit here called Violence and Catharsis, which is the result of a long-term project that I conducted on religious festivals in Bangladesh and Eastern India. And I am co-exhibiting along with Nathan Dvir, who did an exhibit about faith and belief in Israel. I'm also conducting a workshop, or I just finished conducting a workshop on portraiture, basically. And I also did portfolio reviews. And with what little time I have, I'm trying to photograph a little bit too. One of the things that I was remarking on with other people is that how much this is its own place, in the sense that you can see influences from Europe, from Turkey, from maybe Iran a little bit, but it feels like this is a place that culturally determines itself to a large degree, which is very interesting. The landscape is beautiful. I think the other thing that I'd like to photograph is actually, in addition to people, is to get out into the rural environments more, because I think one of the things that makes Georgia such a unique country is its spectacular natural setting. So I'm hoping to get out of the city to look at that. So people also are extraordinary. I find people here very warm, very uncomplicated, very friendly, very graceful. The place feels amazingly safe too. I mean, someone was remarking last night that they saw a woman sitting in a park with an iPad at night. You would never see that in Germany or in France, where I live. And so, yeah, the people here seem like they possess themselves. They're aware of their history and where they come from, and they're very proud of that, and they're happy to share that, and that's a really lovely thing, and it's true in many places of the world, but not all of them. So yeah, I love it here. Okay, I think one of the strong points of the festival is, of course, it's the interaction between people who come from all over the world. So for me, one of the most important things has been meeting all of these different photographers who have been exhibiting, and seeing their work up close, seeing the portfolios that they've brought with them, and hearing their stories, and especially how that exchange happens between, let's say, Georgians and everybody who is from outside Georgia. And on that line, I think that element should be emphasized more in the future. In other words, I would like to meet more Georgian photographers. And I realize that they've been around at some of the openings, but there's a language barrier, and so there's a little bit of shyness on both sides. But I would love to see the festival host more specific events where there's much more active interchange between the photographers like myself who come from abroad and then photographers who are here. Because in a way, that's the biggest learning experience. So I'd love to see more of that. I'm in the middle of radically changing how I photograph. That's in a very simple way, which is that for years I have most thrived on projects that involved a fair measure of travel, and that for a number of reasons. Uh, that is really not so feasible as it used to be when I was younger. So it's much more important that I find a way to photograph things that are close to home. It's very easy to overlook what is immediately around us, and it's far easier to come to even to a place like this and be struck by the things that are very different and exciting because they're different. But ultimately, it's more feasible to photograph what's at 0 kilometer, so to speak, and in a way, what I think that what you know best and what you're around the most will ultimately yield the most beautiful thing. So I'm basically training my eye and my attention on those things, whether it's my family, the immediate landscape where I live in Paris, but of course then I'm always dreaming about going here and there. I read a lovely quote by Pablo Bartholomew, the Indian photojournalist, recently. He said, "We used to be photographers, we're all just image makers now." And that comment speaks to a lot of things. It speaks to the fact that the proliferation of images, the speed at which images can be trafficked, i.e. digital photography and the internet, means that we're swimming in a sea of images unlike ever before. Someone told me the other day how many hundreds of billions of photographs were made last year. I mean, it's insane. Right? And what that has two principal effects on photographers. One is that it dilutes the market, because there can never be enough photographers, but there can be such a thing as too many photographs in a way, as far as the market is concerned. And on the basis of supply and demand, when the market is flooded, you just become another taxi driver. You don't become a specialized person that people seek out. And that poses huge challenges market-wise. There's another issue in terms of how that affects people's attention in general, because people are so awash in images. They're so awash in images that they make, and images that they make of themselves very often, whether it's selfies or whatever else. So one has to ask oneself, how curious are they really to see images that other people make of other places in the world that they have no connection to? And if you ask, your parents or your grandparents, the role that photography played in their lives was huge, because there's this endless curiosity to see the rest of the world. And it almost feels like there's a great temptation nowadays simply just to see what you yourself look like. And so I think that poses a huge challenge to photographers. What are the ways out of that? And there is always, of course, a place for the beautiful photograph. It may be harder for that to be recognized in the future. But that place always exists. Poets still have a role in our society, even though they don't have a functional role per se. One of the things that I have recently come back to is I'm making a lot more prints now than I used to. There was a period in digital photography where, in part because of the expense, because I don't have my own printing setup, I only made prints when I was commissioned to. And largely, my jobs were all digital, and so I never once printed anything out. It was all trafficked and emailed and, hightailed to the client. And at the end of the day, for me, I've come back to the fact that for me, the ultimate reality of a photograph is something that you can hold in your hands, whether it's a book or an actual print. And you might say, well, yeah, but if it's a print, you can't, put it on Facebook and 5 million people can't see it in 1 second. Right? But at the end of the day, it's more real when it's concrete like that. And so one piece of advice that I have for young photographers is to give a central role to the physical reality of a photograph. It will conserve your sense of the photograph as a precious object that you made. Even if the digital photograph and the computer processing program and the inkjet printer did the manual labor, right? You still directed them, managed them to get the result that you wanted. And when you have that as a print, it's real. Someone could steal your hard drives, and then where would all your work be? Right? So I think that's very, very, very important that photographers cultivate that reality. And it leads. The reason why I end with that is that it leads to an answer to Pablo Bartholomew's quote, which is, when you print your photographs, you become a photographer again. You aren't just an image maker. No, it does, but um, if you look at the history of photography, the medium has always been in evolution in terms of the ways in which photographs were made. If you look at the first 50 years of photography, the medium was reinvented 3-4 times, from daguerreotype to wet collodion, to tintype, to all these successive, to silver gelatin, and then from glass plate negative to acetate negative, and then from film based to digital. All these things have changed radically over time. And there's how we make the pictures. What has not changed? That we make pictures. Right? But no, but again, the history of photography serves valuable examples. When Leitz started producing the Leica A, right? That camera was made for the movie industry, right? Because they wanted to be able to shoot a roll of film that was a meter long, right? But it's 35 millimeter film, just like movie film, just to make sure the film stock was good, just to make sure that the lighting was good. It's what we now call dailies in American movie industry. But Leitz was a genius company that made a mechanically flawless object with optics that are still the best in the world. And so photographers got a hold of the camera, people like Kertész, Ilse Bing, Cartier-Bresson, and started photographing with it, and like, wow, this totally changes things. You can focus, you can look through the viewfinder, it's quiet, you can really work stream of consciousness off the top of your head with this. So mechanically, conceptually, artistically, it offered all kinds of possibilities. Now, when you made a print from those on that film, right, and you enlarged it, people who were still working with glass plate negatives laughed their heads off. Look at the grain of that film. You call that real? That's not real. This is real. So every advantage, every technological development presents an advantage. So the fact that a cell phone camera lets you take a picture and transmit it, it doesn't add to the visual quality, but it adds to what the camera can do, right? If a cell phone camera can give you good image resolution, and if it's easy to use, because frankly an SLR in terms of the direct viewing and focusing is still better than an iPhone, right? If it lets you do what you want to do better, then of course. Then at the end of the day, it's just a discourse about how big the box is that you're using, and it doesn't really matter. But it's only a question or a problem when the modern tool isn't as good as the old one. So when digital photography was first introduced, all the camera companies were coming to photographers. It's the future. Film is dead. It's the future. And they were trying to sell 0.5 megapixel cameras for $20,000 that weren't any good, right? And we were furious. We were all really mad. We said, it's not as good as what we do now. How can you tell us that we should switch? Right? So that's the only concern. As long as it's a better tool, then yeah, by all means use it. My main advice for photographers, young photographers, is that you follow your heart and that you trust that inner voice that is inside you and you cultivate it. In other words, every time you take a photograph, it's a choice. You choose to do something. Why is it that you choose to photograph this or choose to photograph that? It's because you have an inner sense of preference of what matters to you. That is the result of your own DNA. It's the result of your cultural and historical experiences. Right? But that's what makes you you. And that voice is like an underground body of water. So it's important to tap into it and to draw water from it. In other words, you will ultimately be your own best teacher if you learn to listen to yourself. That also means being skeptical about what other photographers tell you, including me. So trust yourself. Trust yourself when you're photographing. Trust yourself when you're editing. And don't ignore what other people tell you. Don't be ornery, but follow your heart. Because that's what the great photographers all along have done, is they've been brave enough to believe in themselves. And that's what the medium needs to survive, is people to keep believing in themselves and to add their own voice to the medium. Otherwise, people are just trying to be respectful and do what they're told and do what other people are doing, and that's boring. So it's like, going to hear a blues band that plays the 12-bar blues, or they have played it for 50 years. That's not very interesting.